Let me try that again. Welcome. Good morning. I'm Norman Allen, your intern minister, and I want to welcome you to Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church, a liberal religious community where love works, where we gather to explore the eternal, to nurture community, and to build a more just world. Please know that whoever you are, wherever you are from, whomever you love, whatever your sexual orientation or gender identity, wherever you are on life's journey and whatever your beliefs, life circumstance, or immigration status, you are welcome here. A special welcome to those joining our service online, whether in the moment or catching up with us later. We're glad you're with us. If you are new to Cedar Lane, we have a small gift for you. Please raise your hand and keep it raised for a moment so our ushers can find you. And please join us after the service for our coffee and conversation. If you choose to use a yellow mug, our members and friends will be sure to greet you. It is a special pleasure this morning to see the faces of fellow travelers from our border witness trip, some of whom you'll hear from later in the service. I'm especially pleased to welcome the folks visiting from our partnership church, Davies Memorial, over in Camp Springs, Maryland. Davies member Mariama Anjawacheka will be sharing her personal reflections in a minute. Can the Davies family raise a hand, give us a wave? It has been an amazing partnership already just in these first few months of the church year, and Mariama's family in particular has given me just an incredibly warm welcome over there, so it's such a pleasure to see you here today. A couple of quick announcements. You'll see in the bulletin that this is our week to provide meals at the Women's Center. There is still need, so if you will look in your bulletin, check out the email address or links and follow those. We especially need help towards the end of the week. We want to make sure we meet that annual responsibility. And directly related to our topic today, one of the growing causes of immigration is climate change. And on Wednesday, December 6th, our environmental justice ministry team is partnering with our immigrants' rights team and Surge to bring a bus in support of CASA, Maryland to a national demonstration in favor of DACA, TPS, and immigrant rights. Jim Driscoll, if you could stand, please. Check in with Jim after the service, and he can get you signed up and get you all the information. Before we take a step further, I invite you briefly to turn to a neighbor to your right, to your left, in front, and behind, and offer them a greeting of the morning. Good morning. Thank you. Please have a seat. As we move into our time of worship, as we ease into our time of worship, all are invited to light a candle at the side of the sanctuary, signifying a personal joy, sorrow, celebration, or concern. You will find Janelle Stewart there, ready to welcome you and to assist you. And I'd like to invite Reverend Katie to join me as we share these.
Come join us on this journey into the unknown, reaching toward an ever deeper understanding as we acknowledge all that we don't yet know and can't yet comprehend.
Come with open hearts and open minds to walk the desert trail, to enter detention centers and courtrooms, and to wonder at the strength and the resilience we find there.
Come ready for sorrow, for anger, for awe, and for admiration as you hear the stories we have to share and learn.
as we step out of the center to observe, to inquire, and then to be of use.
Come ready for transformation, yours and ours.
Come, let us worship together.
As Jack Welch comes forward to light the chalice, please rise in body and or in spirit to share in unison the words that are printed in your order of celebration. To face the world's shadows, a chalice of light. To face the world's coldness, a chalice of warmth. To face the world's terrors, a challenge of courage. To face the world's turmoil, a chalice of peace. May its glow fill our spirits, our hearts, and our lives. Please remain as you are to join in singing hymn 1029, Love Knocks and Waits for Us to Hear, in the teal hymnal. each time we gather for worship, we set aside time to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. We gather not for our needs alone, but to bear witness to the joys, sorrows, and milestones that unfold in all of our lives, and to serve as companions to one another throughout these profound journeys of faith. We gather to build a place of solace and healing, a place of welcome and hope, a place of belonging and joy. We gather to build the beloved community where all souls are welcome. Unseen, with mental illness or addictions, and who care for family and friends in ill health, and for those that we now name. Please hold in your prayers Reverend Archene Turner, Mary Means, and Reverend Archene's father. Reverend Archene and Mary are in Florida caring for Reverend Archene's father, who is having some health concerns. Cards and letters sharing your support are welcome. We hold in our hearts all those whose lives are lost and whose loved ones' lives are lost and whose lives are impacted by violence and calamities in our world. Today, we especially remember and hold in our hearts the victims of the violence at the mosque in Egypt. May these friends of ours, our companions in the world, and all that lies unspoken in our hearts be held in the embrace of prayer and silence.
The season of peace, of joy, of ancient victories and lasting light is upon us, and with it comes anxiety. With it comes complicated family dynamics. With it comes the ever-present news rolling across our radios and televisions, our Twitter feeds, reminding us that people's voices have not been heard. Survivors of assault, sexual assault, and bullying may be feeling especially triggered right now. We hold in our hearts all who are suffering, all the beloved who struggle with these issues, with loneliness, with illness, with mental illness, addiction, ill family members, and loss. We hold in our hearts the inner struggles and the outer struggles of the world. My prayer is that we all know peace in this season of peace, that we all know love, and that, as Liesl Mueller, the poet, promises us, that if we breathe and pay attention, we can notice hope hovering in even the darkest corners, waiting for entrance into our hearts. So as we breathe into a moment of silence made holy by our presence, I invite those of us in this silence, grieving a loss or commemorating an anniversary of a loss, to rise in body or spirit, in mourning or memory. Let us enter the silence together. May all hearts be restored. May all feel held by what is holy to them. Amen. Today we're sharing reflections of our Borderlinks trip with you, and I realized as I was typing mine up that those of us who went on the trip, we came to that trip having done lots of preparation work. Prep work that some of us gathered here today might not have engaged in. So I stopped what I was typing and instead would like to offer a framework for you. In our preparation for our trip to Arizona, we engaged with a curriculum that is online, and it was created by the UU College of Social Justice. We read a book titled Undocumented by Aviva Chomsky and engaged with several other readings and videos. Our work included unlearning words like illegal and remembering that a person cannot be illegal. They might have undocumented status, but they are not illegal. And we remembered that none of us has the answer to solve these problems that we face in our society. None of us can do it alone. These current problems that we're facing rise up through many relationships, many choices made over many ages, and they are rooted in systems like colonialism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. There will not be one person who will save us all. There is no single way to defeat this evil we face, and absolutism is the enemy of unwinding the tangled knot of these oppressions. The work will be longer. It will be harder. It will be relationship-driven, and in order to do this work, we need to be personally transformed by it. So we unpacked our personal privileges. We unpacked and explored places where we might have less privilege in our society because this work is deeply intersectional. And it was important for us to begin to determine what our personal biases were, as well as where our points of tenderness resided, what our triggers might be, our personal struggles, and what traumas this work might intensify. As we move through today's reflections, you might notice some of your own tender points being pressed. If you feel triggered today, know that our pastoral visitor, Janelle Stewart, will be available in the library after service. Pastoral visitors are an integral part of the ministry team, and know that you can also schedule an appointment with myself or Reverend Abi to help you unwind what you might be feeling or wondering about. Your ministry team is here to move with you in this journey called life. Each of us who went on the Borderlinks trip was asked to hold a question or two in our hearts that we wanted to answer while we were on the trip. And I encourage you to pause for a moment with me and think about what you might want to learn today. Think about what will hold you and guide you as you listen to the many reflections that'll be offered today. So let's take a moment of silence as you ponder your own questions, as well as that which will hold you on today's spiritual journey. If you don't have a question yet, that's okay. I'll offer you what mine were. I went to the desert to find the holy, to learn about where the spirit that moves through us all and all things resides, even in the worst of circumstances. I wanted to understand how, in the face of such suffering and injustice, spirit still moved. I wanted to understand where the holy lived in the face of loss. I wanted to know how the holy moved in those whom I did not agree with, people I might perceive as aggressors, as part of the problem, people who tested my Universalist belief that all humans are basically good. I wanted to know how the holy was moving in me in relationship to this ministry too. Along this journey, I felt rage and anger as I witnessed injustice and racism. I felt my own shame, too. Growing up, I remember what it was like when my family members were sponsored into citizenship in this country. And I was raised with an understanding that it was my responsibility to help others come to this country, and I failed doing that. My complacency and lack of knowledge about the changing immigration laws is a contributing factor to the horrors that are occurring every single day in our country in the name of all U.S. citizens. And when my guilt and shame wanted to project onto the attorneys, the judges, the other legal entities that were involved and working in systems of continued oppression, I wanted to blame those people. I wanted to other them. I wanted to make everything their fault. But as my thoughts traveled down that path, my theology held me. My theology called me to remember that all humans are basically good, that all beings, as well as all of us humans, move through this primordial soup of creation in relationship to each other and all things. And we humans forget this from time to time. We mess up. We do great harm to ourselves and to others time and again. But we're also capable of redemption, each and every one of us. My theology reminded me that in each moment the great holy moves in me, as and through each and every one of us, ever present and full of what theologian Catherine Keller calls God as omnipotential. For it is in the omnipotential, the all potential, that love lives, and the ability to act with love calls us all from this space. I'm not talking about the pop culture, everything is rosy, fill someone with some white light and call it a day kind of love. I'm talking about the sweaty 10-minute conversation over Thanksgiving dinner, that kind of love. The kind of love where you show up at a protest and you look across the line at the counter protester or the armed security or the police officer and know that you are there for their salvation as much as your own. This is the kind of mighty strength to bend the arc towards justice kind of love. This is the kind of love that makes a person show up time and again at the polls, to write that letter, to make that call, to send that fax, to go to that meeting over and over, even when it's hard, even when it's inconvenient. The kind of love that reminds us all that we are responsible for every life lost in the desert, in the wilderness, in the streets, and we have an ability to respond by doing the hard work of holding space in the moment for lasting human change, not colored by personal ego or personal fear or guilt, but driven by something deeper, a holy whisper that promises us we have the potential to do more, to build a more just world with intentional action built on structures of relationship and accountability. As we move through our reflections, I invite you to keep in mind that some of us gathered today are closer to the story of immigration than others. Some of us are undocumented. Some of us have U.S. citizenship. Some of us have more economic, political, or social privilege than others. And all of us have brought our own stuff to this space today. All of us will have feelings about the stories that are shared. Let's be present to them. As we journey together today, I encourage you to think about your lens that you filter the stories through. Pay attention to your feelings. These are holy messages alluding to the spiritual growth seeking to move in you. They're a call from that place of omni-potential. May your questions and your theology hold you as you do this work of deep listening. May it remind you to listen and explore a deeper truth so that when you commit to going forward and taking action, you do so with the understanding that our social justice work springs from our faith and is not a replacement for it. Let us begin with our first reflection. Good morning.
I'm Harry Olson, and
we're not here.
Reflection. Several Cedar Laners I spoke with before going to Border Links in Tucson last October told me this would be a life-changing experience. Indeed, it was. However, I couldn't anticipate on a personal level the impact of anything like what really happened, what we saw and experienced. On my return and for several weeks afterwards, my emotional responses were sadness for the undocumented people that we saw in detention centers and for those that we had heard about. Also, I experienced disappointment and anger. My disappointment was in realizing that the mean spirit of U.S. policies towards these undocumented people is unrecognized or ignored by many of the Americans including border guards, detention center guards, and federal judges who carry the policies out. The anger that had accompanied my disappointment has mostly abated now. Hard as it is to convey concisely the background of these emotions, I'd like to share my own perspective with two brief examples from that week. The first was a visit to Nogales, Arizona. Nogales is a substantial city located on both sides of the Arizona-Mexico border, and it's the location for several ports of entry into the United States. As we approached Nogales by car, the border wall was visible and prominent. It divides the city in half. The wall is very tall and an imposing metal structure with vertical slats that provide a clear view of the Mexican side. Our delegation leader and guide that day was Manuel Morales. He is affiliate of Borderlinks. And Manuel spent the day with us. We didn't go into Mexico on this trip. Instead, that morning, Manuel took us to a location on the U.S. side of the wall, the site of the shooting and death of an unarmed young Mexican male on the Mexican side of the wall by 2 U.S. border guards stationed on the U.S. side. The young man was reportedly throwing stones towards the wall, and the border guards claimed they felt threatened by his actions, therefore shot the 16-year-old through the slats. This event had occurred several years ago. We understood that a court trial is pending now against the guards. The second event was the walkthrough in the desert just west and north of Nogales. This was the next day. The wall that we saw in Nogales currently runs several miles beyond the city limits and ends in the desert in both directions. The desert walk was an enigma. On one level, it is a vast and beautiful environment with abundant animal and plant life. However, we viewed much evidence of human suffering and loss there, including discarded water jugs, personal items such as clothing and backpacks, and our guide took us to one of several unnamed wood crosses in the desert, unnamed because the identity was unknown, but memorializing where a body had been found. We came to understand that the desert itself is a wall. It's a wall that challenges anyone desperate for freedom or anyone trying to escape certain death from gangs in Central America, or people trying to unite with loved ones in the U.S. with an unhappy outcome. As for me, I found myself challenged by these and other experiences from this trip. My disappointment with the actions of the border guards, with detention center personnel, and with federal judges who masquerade as dispensers of justice. The challenge was my faith in the Unitarian Universalist first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. I do and I will continue to feel sadness and unquestioned love for the afflicted, undocumented people that I met and those I heard about from this trip. And I'll continue to look for ways to replace anger and disappointment with compassion and love for the afflictors.
When you see me, you don't know. such a sad road, driven from my homeland, shattered families without freedom, dignity or memory, before you would refuse. Come cross a border in my shoes. Get to know me, get to know me, where I'm from, where I live, stories that I had to give when we share the things that we've been through. I could get to know you too.
Scattered pieces, pictures, people left behind in piles of broken, wasted towns.
And we drown and start till someone turns around, turns around. Before you close your door, would you consider something more? Get to know me, get to know me, where I'm from, where I live, stories that I have to give when we share the things that we've been through. I could get to know you too.
Good morning. Thank you again for that beautiful song. Thank you for your testimony, Harry, and your words, Katie. They gave me strength. I'm Roger Santo Domingo, membership coordinator here at Cedar Lane, but also a Venezuelan journalist. As well Whitman put it, I'm multitudes. I'm sometimes contradictory identities I have inside. But I'm grateful to be here and to my Cedar Lane friends that made it possible for me to go to Tucson to experience this pilgrimage. That was a trip that has shaken me to my core. And I have to hold to these words because they are written with a lot of thought and I still grasping with emotions that I don't know how to deal with. Well, one day after coming back from the desert walk, we went to a court to witness Operation Streamline. Let me tell you this. When I entered that criminal court, my heart was pounded. We saw 70 people captured in the desert by Border Patrol, being brought there as the most heinous criminals, briefly released from their shackles to face a judge. Their crime was to cross from Mexico, undocumented. As an immigrant myself, I feel uneasy, to say the least, because a country's law that is temporarily protecting me is the same used to condemn so many people, and they are my people too. An hour into the proceedings, and it wasn't my heart, but my brain, the one pounding. What we witnessed was a very mechanical process which was not designed to generate surprises nor justice. The judge read the charges with the monotony of a rosary prayer, while the sinners always respond with this sad, dim voice, guilty, culpable, guilty, culpable, culpable, using on average less than 2 minutes for each defendant. The judge condemned all of them, as always happens. Streamlined judges have sentences many legitimate asylum seekers, people with legal reasons to be here, and even some permanent residents and citizens. Just there is not enough time for them to present their cases. It was striking to me that everybody in that courtroom was so amicable. I'm sure that later that day, every lawyer, agent, and even the judge went home to dinner with their kids or watch TV, to Netflix. They might not see the things that I saw. They may not see it this way, but they work in a factory line that process people as sausages, most of them innocent, and send them to jail and then back to their countries, to their desperation, sometimes to circumstances of unjust persecution, to be tortured or killed. Officers were not monsters. They were doing their job. In that instant came to my mind, the trials of Adolf Eichmann in Israel, as reported by Hannah Arendt, that philosopher, the concept of the banality of evil. At that time, most people regarded Eichmann as an evil monster. He was, after all, the father of this final solution to exterminate the Jews. But Arendt wasn't most people. Eichmann didn't strike to her as a particularly evil man, but as a good bureaucrat. He clung to the idea that he was unable to change. That way, Eichmann was not only claiming innocence, but discrediting the idea that the Nazi criminals were different, that they not were psychopaths, they were like us, normal people. He was just a good citizen. But he didn't trick Arendt. What we regard as evil is capable of a fairly ubiquitous presence, if only because it tends to appear in the guise of good. She didn't conclude that situations such as the Holocaust can make ordinary people commit horrible crimes, given a specific context or incentive. And I'm not, please understand, I'm not equating here Operation Streamline to the Holocaust. But in both situations, the Streamline judge and the Border Patrol in Tucson, as Eichmann in Nazi Germany, were voluntarily following the principle of authority. But they forgot to apply another principle of the law, which is the principle of reciprocity, the golden rule, the one that hold me together and many of you too. They decided to apply the law even if it was unjust. I can see that there is a substantial moral distance between this final solution and the Operation Streamline. But shouldn't also exist an abysm, a substantial moral distance between a totalitarian regime in the 20th century and democracy in the 21st? Today, more clearly than in the past, the moral choice between good and evil belongs to the individual, the voter, the politician, the legislator. The executioner chooses the acts, and nobody can blame society for its own decisions. All of our choices have political consequences, even when the chooser seems politically powerless. I left you with Hannah Arendt. Under conditions of terror, most people will comply, but some people will not. Just as the lessons of the countries to which the final solution was proposed is that it could happen in most places, but it did not happen everywhere. Humanly speaking, no more is required, and no more can reasonably be asked for this planet to remain a place fit for human habitation. Please don't let the Streamline judge, the Border Patrol, or the legislator to trick you. Don't be as most people. Don't comply. Don't be accomplices. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Reflections of Miss Unknown. As we traveled to the desert 11 miles north of the southern border in Arizona, I remember feeling relaxed and calm. I was preparing myself for an hour of desert exploration. When we arrived to the desert trail, however, my metropolitan, West African-influenced mind had to quickly process the reality of walking with my group through an unknown area where rattlesnakes and invisible miniature cacti bushes reside. As we progressed in our desert walk, I noted possessions laying on the ground as evidence of those undocumented brothers and sisters who may have escaped the apprehension of the Custom and Border Protection officers, surrendered to CBP, or met an untimely death. I observed possessions such as bras, book bags, and water jugs. This shocking scene would now prove to be a part of me forever. The most significant part of this trek, aside from me accidentally stepping on a cactus bush, was walking along the trail and meeting Miss Unknown. With a simple, dusty orange-colored cross laced with small blue tape around its edges and a bare circular metal piece in the center of her tombstone, I met her. These are the decorations made to commemorate an undocumented migrant's grave. I decided to call the person in the grave Miss Unknown. No one knows her or his real story. The only definite is that he or she had died. I surmise the hardest part of this moment on the trail was processing that Miss Unknown's family might have been expecting a call from her within a few days, stating that she had made it. She had successfully crossed the border. But this grave was proof that her family would never hear her voice again. The motivation to seek a better life, the determination to walk to her liberation, the hope to start new, albeit undocumented, were the thoughts that pressed themselves onto my chest, paralyzed my breath, and stilled my spirit. You see, family, I am first-generation African-American in this country. My parents are from Sierra Leone, West Africa, and I grew up with a very strict set of rules in our home, only reserved for abundant love, quality education, and proper manners. These three pillars were emphasized with the expectation that my siblings and I will carry on what my parents had started when they arrived to the United States of America. My parents achieved the identical dream Miss Unknown was in the midst of dreaming. I kept thinking to myself, what if I were her and she were me? How could I manage in this hot, unforgiving desert? Would I feel safe to sleep? Would I make it? My heart broke when I learned of how treacherous this trip really is. My spirit cried for the lost, the forgotten, the loved, and the wandering. The undocumented travel at night and sleep during the day. How? I stepped on a cactus bush in broad daylight. Where do they lay down to sleep? We all had to walk together to avoid the rattlesnake holes spread aplenty throughout our trail. Remember when I first mentioned how relaxed and calm I was while traveling to the desert? Well, by this time, I had quickly morphed into a depressed, stressed, and anxious woman who desperately wanted to return to the van we traveled in. I no longer wanted to feel the stark sadness of traveling a road with so much uncertainty. I was scared. The only guarantee in this journey for Miss Unknown, should none of this work out, her burial would be here, side by side with the cacti, the rattlesnakes, and the unmerciful sun. I think of that walk often. I will never forget the tenacious survival skills Miss Unknown must have had to make it that far. Family, she made it. She crossed the border, her last 11 miles north. Although her breath expired 11 miles into her dream, Hopefully, her story will live on. Blessings.
Sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true. With thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you.
With thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you.
We're a few days past Thanksgiving, but I am so grateful for the music that comes into this community, and I'm so grateful for the fellow travelers, both this year and last year, on this journey along the borderlands. I do have a confession to make. I have fallen in love with the town of Tucson. It's a very friendly place, a place with a slower pace than most cities on the East Coast. It's a place with a lighting ordinance that keeps street lights dim, so the unnatural and unnecessary glare that we all live in every night is there, a dimmer, more shadowy, more natural glow, and you can see the stars. I've been to Tucson 3 times now. The first visit was actually several years ago, before I ever stepped foot at Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church. I was there in my capacity as a playwright. I was invited by folks at the University of Arizona to research a potential theater project aimed at telling the stories of Tucson's vast population of Muslim refugees. The project came to nothing, but the city and the topic fascinated me. I hold especially fond memories of joining Friday worship at the Islamic Center's mosque, memories that were much on my mind this week as news came of the killing, the loss of life in Egypt. More recently, in just the last 2 years, I've developed a professional crush on Cedar Lane's partners in Tucson, especially the folks at our host organization Borderlinks and at Mariposas Sin Fronteras, or Butterflies Without Borders, which serves LGBTQ immigrants and refugees. Over and over again, I found myself, both this year and last, in the presence of people who lead gently, who listen without judgment, but who are ready to correct or redirect a conversation that has gone off track, people whose job it is to work towards immigrant justice and to do that through educating, leading toward enlightenment, the ignorant, stumbling, and bumbling folks like myself. You've heard a bit about this recent trip from my fellow pilgrims this morning, and many of you have heard stories and insights from last year's experience as well. That first journey led to Cedar Lane declaring itself a sanctuary church and turning that declaration into something real and tangible. That first trip, thank you. That first trip led to trainings and workshops, to marches, to walking in company with people presenting themselves to immigration authorities. I am astounded by the work that has occurred and the accomplishments made by this congregation in the past year. And I am looking at faces, the people who made that happen. But returning to Tucson this October, with a year's worth of knowledge and work behind me, a year of delivering sermons on sanctuary from this very pulpit, of writing on LGBTQ immigrant justice issues for publication, I found myself feeling as ignorant and as awkward as I had the year before. Because on a certain level, I still don't get it. During our visit to a detention center, Harry and I met with a young man, Jose, from El Salvador, an honest cop in a dishonest system. Jose had learned that his name was on a list of people to be killed by members of a drug cartel. He escaped the country, leaving behind his wife and little girl. He was detained at our border, and he'll be released from detention if he can raise $7,500 while incarcerated. If he can't do that, he has a court hearing in January of 2019. I understand those facts. I get that. I can certainly feel for him, but I can't possibly know what it means to live in that reality. We actually connected most closely over our love of dogs and through sharing stories of the rescue dogs we've loved and have been loved by. But I can't know what it means to be separated indefinitely from my family, a family who are now themselves in danger. I can't know what it means to be incarcerated when I committed no crime except that of survival. I have to add here, I also can't imagine the courage and the strength and the resilience it took him to make the steps he did, to cross into the desert, as we've heard, a deadly place, but to continue on and to start to build a new life. But I wanted to try to make some attempt to get inside these stories, of experiencing them as something more than a reason for righteous anger, as relevant, as satisfying as that can be. I found myself thinking of the first and last of our Unitarian Universalist principles, the inherent worth and dignity of all persons and the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part. I reminded myself that everyone involved in Jose's story is a person of inherent worth and dignity. He, his wife, his daughter, but also the people instructed to take his life, the people who detained him at the border, the people who passed judgment on him, the people who will help him raise $7,500, and the people who arrange for me and Harry to visit and perhaps to brighten his day. All of us of inherent worth and dignity, and all of us part of the interdependent web of existence. But what does that mean? It means that I played a small role in Jose's life by sitting with him for 90 minutes in that cinder block room. But it also must mean that I played a role in the threat on his life. It must mean that I played a role in the establishment and growth of drug cartels. I played a role in a system of privatized detention centers in which profits are dependent on those centers remaining full. It means that I am implicated in deaths in the desert and in the streamlined diminishment of people's lives. It means that I am one with the men and women of the Border Patrol, driving marked vans and unmarked cars along the roads we traveled this October. Some of these links are not difficult to uncover. Poverty and the resulting instability in Central America can be easily traced to United States policies. They can be traced to climate change, which I contributed to when I drove here this morning. But I'm talking about something that runs deeper. It's easy to decry the border wall that already exists and that some would like to extend. But what about the border walls that we build here? Border walls built between members of political parties. Border walls built between those who are literate and those who are not. Border walls built between creedal Christians and non-creedal Unitarians. Border walls built between generations, races, and genders, between neighborhoods, between Northwest DC and Northeast, between the near bank of the Anacostia River and the far. And what might we learn from the people in our own communities, here at Cedar Lane, at work, at school, who have found the courage to make those difficult crossings, who have spanned those divides? Think of how much they have to offer us. Our group in Tucson this year had some resonant, deep conversations about the borders we experience or avoid or build or cross here at home. I don't know yet. Perhaps that will be a place this more recent delegation places their energies. We'll see. A few weeks ago, I had the honor of speaking at the monthly Alliance Luncheon and shared some of these thoughts on the borderlands. During the Q&A that followed, I was asked a question that took me aback. It was a simple question. What would you do? If I, could shape U.S. immigration policy, what would that policy be? Would I just let anyone in? I confessed then, from this podium, as I will confess now, I don't know. I don't know how to shape a policy built around my deep and lasting awareness of an interdependent web of existence made up of people of inherent worth and dignity, in which there is no us and them, there is only we. I don't want to sound naive. I know that the idea of experiencing the world entirely in the first person plural is aspirational. Certainly it is for me. But what an aspiration to have. And it's a goal we can act on, reach for, throughout the day, every day, in the comfort of our own homes, watching TV for sure. Change, look at what they're doing, to look at what we've done. And change, look at what we've done, to what can we do now? How can we change? Even as that wall stands along the border shared with our neighbors, funneling desperate refugees into the desert's most dangerous crossings, we can tear down the walls that shape the us-them divide here at home. We can return from those more obvious borderlands to recognize the borders that exist in our own community, and we can begin to cross them. You don't have to live in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, or California to visit with immigrants and refugees incarcerated in detention centers. You can do that in Columbia, Maryland. Or challenge yourself more personally. Place yourself in a situation where English is not the dominant language. When I attended services at that mosque in Tucson, or when I attend them here at the Islamic Center in Washington, I don't know a word that is spoken. I'm the outsider, the stranger who is welcomed, and welcomed warmly, welcomed with curiosity. Cross the border into the unknown and into a place where you are not known. Be the stranger. After our group walked the desert trail, we took a picnic break in a small town about 10 miles from the border, then met with a representative of a grassroots network of folks to help when an immigrant in distress crosses through the area. There is some need for discretion here, so I'll call the group's representative, Laura. She spoke of her personal practice of leaving jugs of water at the gates of her remote home, placed there for those headed north desperate for a drink, and signaling to them that her home is a safe place. She told us of a young man who arrived on her property unable to walk any further because of the blisters and wounds on his feet. She gave him food, shelter, and care for about a week. When he was healed, she sent him on his way. Laura has a neighbor who takes a different approach. If that same refugee had wandered onto her property, she would have called Border Patrol. He would now be in detention or already deported. There was one day, though, when this neighbor saw a young woman stumbling up her dirt road. She watched as the woman got down on her hands and knees to drink from a puddle. The neighbor got on the phone, but called Laura and said, "There's someone outside, you might want to help." A crack, a chink in the armor. I think back to that question of policy, of what would I do, and I find that I do have an answer. I would craft a policy that reflects the country that I believe in, a country of people who act like Laura. I would craft a policy that makes it clear, even before being asked, that we are here to help. I would craft a policy that makes us a nation of people who leave water jugs at the gate and welcome strangers in need into our home. May it be so. Amen.
Our invocation this morning invited us to journey into the unknown in the company of beloved fellow travelers. As this morning's offering is given and received, let us remember how difficult such journeys can be, and remember, too, the strength and comfort that we find within these walls. Mindful of the many questions that we raise and face together, the offering will now be given and most gratefully received. For the gifts that we have given and for the gifts that we receive, we offer our deep gratitude as we travel this road together. Please stand in body and or in spirit to sing hymn number 1018, Come and Go With Me, from the Teal Hymnal.
Friends, as we leave this place this morning, I invite you to welcome the stranger and to be the stranger. To be vulnerable, to be open. I invite us to be an us that encompasses all of the thems, so that that word fades from our vocabulary. I invite us to go in peace, to return in love, and to do good work in the days between. Amen. Please be seated to enjoy the postlude.